and I ask them where they are, and they respond with many different uh, ideas. I'm in Ithaca, New York. I'm at Cornell University. I'm at Cornell Botanic Gardens, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. Look where you are, where you're standing. You're standing in Europe and Asia. And then I have them walk across the path, and they step onto the native lawn. We encourage people to walk on the native lawn, and I ask them where they are now, and the answer is, you're in New York. And that, I think, is kind of a profound thing, because we lose the connection to place when we lose the connection to the plants. And I know I'm speaking to the choir here with a bunch of native plant enthusiasts, but really understanding sense of place is kind of at a foundational level about the landscapes that are making up that sense of place. And you know, I harken back to Wendell Berry and some of those themes that he so eloquently has written about. But I think about sense of place now, not just geographically, but in the time that we live in and the crisis that we're grappling with biodiversity loss and climate change and all kinds of existential threats to nature. And so this is a really momentous time. And there's an opportunity here, a call to action, where we can really make a change that could be impactful. And we think that part of that can come from the native lawn and how we expand the kinds of places that native plants can be utilized. So I set the stage in my talk that way. Now, talking about all the evil things about traditional turf grass lawns. They're the dominant landscape type in the traditional United States landscapes, comprising of monocultures of turf, and they account for almost 2% of the land base in the United States. Now, that might not sound like much, but it adds up to 40 million acres, or simply the equivalent of the state of Wisconsin. So it is actually collectively a huge amount of land. Maintaining the traditional lawn is labor intensive, it's polluting, it consumes huge amounts of water, and provides little benefit to native wildlife. Traditional turf lawns also require significant amounts of energy to create and maintain. Nitrogen fertilizer is a leading polluter of our waterways, where excessive application and runoff promotes algal blooms. These blooms eventually decompose, promoting anoxic conditions, starving freshwater life of essential oxygen. Excess nitrogen also plays a role in promoting and increasing the toxicity of harmful algal blooms. Many pesticides are also very polluting and can be acutely toxic to fish, birds, and pollinators. In the United States, a staggering 90 million tons of pesticides and fertilizers are applied to lawns annually. Traditional lawns are also an enormous time suck. The average American spends about 70 hours a year on lawn and garden care. Given that many people don't have yards, particularly in urban areas, this means that the time spent is significantly higher. Lawns also require significant amounts of fresh water to maintain, particularly in more arid regions. Here's a fact about how much water we actually use. American lawns take up an area of 3 times more than any other irrigated crop in the United States. And if that isn't bad enough, lawnmowers account for 5% of the nation's air pollution. Turf mowing consumes over 800 million gallons of gasoline annually, resulting in 7.1 million tons of CO2 emissions. That's greater than the entire state of Vermont emits across all emission sectors. Measured another way, in just 1 hour, a lawnmower produces as much air pollution as driving a car for 100 miles. Given the climate crisis that we are facing, reducing emissions across all sectors, including in our homes and yards, is essential. And lastly, traditional lawns are composed of non-native grasses and non-native spontaneous weeds that are originally from Europe and Asia and offer limited quality habitat to native birds and insects. In short, we need to say no to traditional turfgrass lawns and ditch them. To help change this paradigm and provide a viable alternative, the Botanic Gardens embarked on an ambitious project to create a native plant-dominated lawn. This native lawn demonstration project aimed to create a shift in how we design and landscape our homes and public green spaces, and ultimately to advance sustainability itself. The project converted a non-native grass and weed lawn to a low maintenance, low energy input, and high biodiversity sustainable native lawn. Our goals were simple. We wanted to maintain or even enhance the traditional aesthetics of a turf lawn. We wanted it to be able to tolerate a moderate amount of trampling, and we wanted to eliminate watering, fertilizer, and pesticide inputs post-establishment. We also wanted the lawn to require only minimal hand weeding after the first 2 to 3 years, and to significantly curtail carbon dioxide emissions by only mowing it once or twice a year. Two primary measures of success were if it consisted of at least 85% cover of native plant species and increase the overall biodiversity of pollinators and other fauna. Our project was inspired by this beautiful little plant here, Xanthonia spicata, or poverty oats grass, as it's commonly known. A Botanic Gardens horticulturalist, Chrissy Boyes, is credited with the inspiration for our native lawn and to finding Xanthonia and bringing it into the lawn as our principal species. Chrissy fell in love with Xanthonia the moment she met it, growing along an old seasonal road. She then found it under power line cuts, in old well-established city parks and cemeteries, all places with light levels of disturbance that it seemed to favor. Many of these areas appeared similar to traditional lawns, but with native New York species rather than typical Eurasian ones. The combination of native species and a lawn aesthetic provided the inspiration for creating the native lawn. And what these areas where we found Xanthonia all had in common was that the disturbance that they received was enough to keep them partially sunny or sunny, but light enough disturbance that it was not detrimental to the native plants. Locally in the Northeast, we have both Xanthonia spicata and Xanthonia compressa, which are both widely distributed, with compressa growing in the eastern third of North America and spicata growing in nearly every state and Canadian province. And as you can see from the distribution maps, both occur here in New Jersey. Each species of Xanthonia are low-growing, cool season or C3 grasses that are highly drought adapted. Mature plant heights have basal leaves up to 10 inches tall and flower stalks up to 24 inches high. And Xanthonia spicata has this lovely growth habit of being this curly leaves that gives it an added extra level of interest and attraction. We also found inspiration in New York alvars or limestone pavement barrens. Plant communities such as this one, in the Nature Conservancy's Chaumont Barrens in Jefferson County. Our project needed a home, and we selected an existing turf area within the Cornell Botanic Gardens Mundi Wildflower Garden here at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Here is an early spring 2007 photograph of our project site. We intentionally selected a location that had a slight south aspect at less than a 3% grade to help make the site slightly drier. The uphill side is bounded by a native perennial planting and the southern edge by a roadside and a shallow ditch. We then developed an overall site work plan and schedule. Site preparation began in 2008 in the early fall with a glyphosate treatment to the turf, followed by the removal of sod with small equipment. We then amended the clay loam soil with 2 inches of sand lightly incorporated into the site. Xanthonia and other native graminoid and forb seeds were collected locally under power line cuts in old cemeteries, old road beds, and adjacent fields. Seeds were then cleaned using a brush machine and clipper cleaners to remove the awns. Seeds to be broadcast were mixed with sawdust and then cold moist stratified for 60 days. Seeds for propagation were sown in February in 10 by 20 inch flats with cold moist stratification of 40 degrees for 60 days in a commercial pro-mix. The Xanthonia were also grown in pots with the mix of expanded shale and an all-purpose peat. The flats you can see up in the top right, and the expanded shale mixed with peat in the bottom photograph there. We developed a schematic planting design that included some experimental variables. These included 2 different seeding rates for seeds-only plantings and a section with plug-only planting. We also designed in some elements for some specialty plants. These included moss phlox, Phlox subulata, bluets, Houstonia cerulea, and pussy toes, Antenaria neglecta and Antenaria plantaginifolia. These species are all low growing and provide additional diversity, interest, and color. In all, we planted 8 grasses and sedges that met our criteria of being native, low growing, and drought adapted. Beyond Xanthonia, these included 3 carices, Eburnia, Pennsylvanica, and Tansa, Agrostis scabra or tickle grass, and Schizocarium scoparium little blue stem. Of these 8, all persisted and remain today except for one, Poa alsoides or woodland bluegrass. We selected 9 native forbs that also met our criteria of being native, low growing, drought adapted, and of value for pollinators or other insects. The eastern prickly pear cactus, which yes, is native to parts of New Jersey and New York, was planted for a bit of whimsy for visitors, and unlike the rest of the native lawn, is not advised to walk on. Our mix included 2 species of Antenaria, Houstonia cerulea, Penstemon hirsutis, and Cicericium angustifolium. We also later added Fragaria virginiana, wild strawberry, and harebell, Campanula rotundifolia. All but 3 species that we established remain today, while Columbine, Aquilegia canadensis, wild geranium, Geranium maculatum, and the bluets, Houstonia cerulea, did not persist. As part of our establishment trial, we tested 2 seeding rates to determine if there would be any differences in success long term. While the recommended seeding rate was between 1,000 to 3,000 seeds per square foot, our seed supply was much more limited, so one zone was planted at 660 seeds per square foot and a second zone at 1,400 seeds per square foot. The seeds were sown in mid-April to early May in 2009 and watered in for good seed to soil contact. We had good initial germination for all seeding rates and good establishment within 2 months. Long term, we found no significant difference in cover based on our 2 different seeding rates. By May of that same year, our seedlings that were started in the greenhouse were ready to be transplanted for our plug treatment trials. This included Xanthonia spicata individuals that were grown in the expanded shale and peat mix. The seedlings were then outplanted and watered as needed in the first year to promote establishment. You see our little bluets here and little cute little arrangement. Here's some of our columbine that didn't persist as well. The lawn was filling in very well by the following April, but gaps remained between the planted plugs. So on the right side, you can see our seeding rate where it was fairly uniform, and on the left side of the screen, you can still see the clumped distribution of the plugs that went in the plug-only treatment. But by June of that year, the lawn was filling in very well. That July, we did have a bit of a setback and confirmed that we had a fungus outbreak that affected some of the Xanthonia population. This was located in the higher of the 2 seeding rate sections. We did end up treating that outbreak successfully with a fungicide and had good seedling recruitment from Xanthonia spicata later that year. This was the only time that we had to use a fungicide on the project. Our only herbicide use post-establishment was a small experimental glyphosate treatment on Kentucky bluegrass that was unsuccessful and given up on. By the fall of that year, the area with the fungal outbreak had nearly fully recovered. The following season, we had a good crop of Danthonia seeds, so we opted to delay our typical mowing and allow for the seed harvest for additional expansion for the following year. Post-establishment, our typical mowing regime is to cut the area in early June and again in late August at 6 to 8 inches high to promote short stature fall flowering forbs. We now mow the lawn using a scythe, so the lawn has zero carbon emissions presently. For site preparation for our second phase, the area had been sprayed with glyphosate and scraped in 2009, then planted with native grasses as a placeholder. We then opted to use a weed barrier fabric to solarize the cover crop and weeds and eliminate competing vegetation in the fall of 2011. For the soil amendment, we opted to test using 2 inches of stone dust rather than sand to amend the clay loam soil, increase drainage, and determine if that more locally sourced material would be equally effective as an amendment. We tried to copy the seeding rates from the 2009 planting, but unfortunately had to reduce the rate by about 50% due to lack of seeds. We planted the site in late June of 2012 and covered it with remade fabric as a shade structure, as that spring and early summer were quite hot and dry. We did have to do some hand weeding, particularly during the first two establishment years, for both respective phases. For example, we tried to limit non-native species such as white clover, Trifolium repens. Although it's a great pollinator plant, and we love to promote it in traditional turfgrass lawns, as a legume, we wanted to limit it fixing and adding nitrogen to the soil and become a dominant species. We also continued to selectively hand weed invasive species such as thistles and woody seedlings. Today we spend significantly less time weeding than we would be mowing if it were still in turf, and estimate that we spend less than 5 hours a year on maintenance. Now I'd like to share and highlight some species that are in our native lawn and details on each. Here we have hairy beardstongue, Penstemon hirsutus, which is a great midsummer pollinator plant that does tolerate mowing very well. The lovely bluets, Houstonia caerulea, that did very well early on, unfortunately didn't persist for more than 3 years. We suspect that it didn't fare well under the intense interspecific competition that developed as the native lawn grew in. Moss phlox, Phlox subulata, also did very well early on, but waned in later years. The white inflorescence shown here in the spring of 2013 are from 2 species of pussytoes, Antenaria neglecta and Antenaria plantaginifolia. As many native systems, the plant community and its appearance here changes over the course of the year. Here's a close-up of the pussytoes' basal leaves with very low growing profile, forming nearly a full carpet. We also included Carex pennsylvanica, or Pennsylvania sedge. This is a very common open woodland species found in dry oak forest that also grows rhizomously, which is a nice characteristic for a lawn species to have. Unfortunately, it's difficult to start from seed, so this was introduced from vegetatively propagated material. Another sedge that we included was Carex tonsa, or shaved sedge, the green looking one there in the middle of the photo. Wild strawberry, Fragaria virginiana, was introduced a few years into the study and did very well in the native lawn. This is a species that can also grow well in traditional turf lawns if introduced and allowed to grow in a pesticide-free lawn. Here's a nice summer photograph of the 2 Danthonia species, Spicata and compressa, showing their flowering combs and spikelets. So one of the really nice features about these species is that they have this naturally low growing profile. If we weren't interested in collecting the seeds, you could just keep mowing it off and it would still be in that 6 to 8 inch height category, which is very reasonable to walk through. Xanthonia leaves naturally grow only to 10 to 12 inches high, with the flowering columns at 2 feet, as I just mentioned. And as I shared earlier, it has a really interesting growth form to it that I think it's highly attractive that it has all those curlicue leaves on it. We also had a number of native species seeded in from the adjoining native landscape gardens that added diversity to the native lawn. For forbs and woody plants, we had 33 native species total that established spontaneously as of 2022. This included a number of fall flowering asters, including Symphyoptricum cordifolium, or heart-leaved blue aster, Symphyoptricum levi, or smooth blue aster, which is highly drought tolerant, and Symphyoptricum prenanthioides, or bushy aster, which prefers a bit more moisture and shade. We also had a number of violet species that thrived in the native lawn. Here we have Viola sagittata, or arrow-leaved violet, Viola palmata, and wood violet, and Viola sororia, common blue violet. As the name implies, this species is common, grows readily from seed, and can persist in traditional turf lawns if they're not mowed too short and are managed without pesticides. And lastly, another attractive and excellent pollinator species is great blue lobelia, Lobelia syphilitica. For non-native species, we had 6 grasses that established spontaneously in the lawn. Not surprisingly, we had some Kentucky bluegrass that has crept in, but it was only in low densities. It actually gets out competed a lot by the native grasses and the other native plants, particularly during drought years. So even though it might increase a bit over time, it gets set back during the drought years when the native plants are out competing it for water. So that, we learned, has kept it at bay and has not allowed it to bully its way in. So just in small amounts. We had 2 species of agrostis appear, which are also low growing and attractive. Also appearing spontaneously is Xanthoanthum odoratum, or sweet vernal grass, which acts very much like Xanthonia and could be a surrogate species if you're willing to consider non-native species in a lawn. And for non-native forbs and woody plants, we have identified 21 species that appeared spontaneously in the trial. These included several turf weeds such as chickweed, black medic, plantain, self-heal, and dandelion. We also had some common weeds of old fields and roadsides such as Queen Anne lace, hawkweed, common St. John's wort, to name a few. For invasive non-native species, we had Canadian thistle and multiflora rose. And those we had to extricate. We didn't want them to get too much of a toehold in the native lawn. That said, overall, the non-native species remained at low densities. You may recall we originally set a performance goal to have 85% native plant cover. To test this, we surveyed the native lawn in July of 2022 to determine the cover of Xanthonia species, other native species, non-native species, bare ground, and litter, and assess that for both the sand augmentation treatment and the stone dust augmentation treatment. Overall, we met the goal of 85% native cover in the sand treatment, and we're close for the stone dust treatment at 80% native cover. Xanthonia fared better in the sand treatment with 12% cover, while only half of that in the stone dust at 6%. The cover of non-native species was higher in the stone dust at 20%, while only being 13% in the sand treatment. We speculate that some of these differences may be due to differences in pH between soil amendments, with the more calcareous stone dust amended soil having a pH of 8.2, and the more acidic sand a lower pH at 7.6. The lower seeding rate for the 2012 stone dust planting may also have affected the outcome. Now, the reason that we're talking about pH here is it's one way measuring as a surrogate for nutrient availability for some plants. The increased pH provides more carbonates in the soil, allows plants to pull in nutrients better than being more limited with lower pH. So as a rule of thumb, we're like, we want better drained soils, we want lower pH, not because the native lawn does less well in those, but because the other undesirable species do better in higher moisture, higher pH sites, we believe. Another measure of success for the native lawn was to see an increase in biodiversity for wildlife and insects. To test this, we sampled the insect community in 2023 in the native lawn and within the nearby traditional turfgrass lawn. Here, Botanic Garden student interns are sampling the lawn just prior to its first mowing of the season in mid-July, and our sampled traditional turf lawn can be seen in the background. What we found from the surveys was that the native lawn yielded nearly 4 times as many insect families represented versus traditional lawns, with 36 families documented in the lawn in just 1 day of sampling. But the difference was not just in the totals, but that there was higher levels of complexity and diversity of niche roles in the insects represented in the native lawn, from herbivores to predators to even parasitoids, than compared to the traditional lawn. Another goal that we had was to have the native lawn meet or exceed expectations for aesthetics. Even though it is a subjective value, and I'm certainly biased, I think we definitely met the mark, not just for this season in the spring, but also across the year. Continuing through the seasons, here's early summer. It also remained greener than the traditional turf lawn when we had a major drought in 2016, while nearby turf lawns were totally brown. And a beautiful early autumn photo of the native lawn. Even in early winter, the native lawn's winter plumage has variable hues and structures of interest. And the added duff layer helps insulate the ground and overwintering insects community. So in large part, we think we met the aesthetics goal that we set, not only for the growing season, but year round. So by all measures, we feel we've met our original goals: aesthetics, trampling, infrequent mowing, no fertilizer, and no watering. We principally met the no pesticide goal, except for the one-time use of the fungicide and the experimental glyphosate treatment on Kentucky bluegrass. We also observed over 4 times as many insect families in the native lawn. And now the lawn is in maintenance mode. We also spend very little time hand weeding, with only a few hours spent annually, and have 0 carbon emissions. And we have a diverse, resilient lawn consisting of over 85% native plant cover that presently consists of 55 native species. So, for the future directions, we're collaborating with university researchers to determine the carbon sequestration rate differences between traditional turf, low mow turf, and the native lawn. So low mow turf is less frequent mowing and allowing it to grow higher. It's kind of halfway between turf and a meadow. Not as functional as a turf lawn, but it's one of the practices that we're doing here at Cornell University. And so that research was looking into the carbon sequestration rates between those 3 principal practices that we have here. But beyond the carbon savings from the reduced mowing, we also expect many of these deep-rooted species in the native lawn will sequester significantly more carbon than other traditional lawns. We're also collaborating on a below-ground invertebrate study to compare species composition with traditional lawns and no-low lawns. So now, scaling up. And I'm sure many of you originally heard about our native lawn in the New York Times article written by Margaret Roach that ran in September of 2023. The article was meant to promote the native lawn and get people to think about alternatives to traditional turf. But it was also intended to help create demand in the marketplace for native plant materials. There is this interesting chicken and the egg dilemma where nurseries won't carry certain species unless there's a public demand for them. And on the flip side, the public demand won't happen unless people know about and value these species and their uses. So given the response the article generated, and you are a testament to that as well here on the webinar, we know that the public demand is there. And now we need to channel that information to commercial nurseries to grow the seed. This is where a new partnership we are involved with called the Northeast Native Seed Network comes in. Cornell Botanic Gardens and other partners, including commercial nurseries, are working to expand commercial availability of locally sourced, locally adapted native plant seed for habitat restoration and native lawns. And Danthonia spicata is part of this initiative. And longer term, through this network, we hope to be able to provide commercially available native lawn seed mixes. In the meantime, there are a few commercial nurseries that we know who are producing Danthonia currently, though you should expect that the original source is within their respective states. These nurseries include Pinelands in New Jersey, I'm sure many of you are aware of, Prairie Moon in Minnesota, Hamilton Native Outpost in Missouri, and Everwild in California. And if anyone on the webinar today knows of another commercial source, I would love to know about it. So please let me know. I'll have my email address at the end of the webinar. You can put it in the chat as well. We are also working on developing what we're presently calling the Native Lawn 2.0. Where we aim to create a new mix of species that incorporates our lessons learned, including planting many of the desirable species that grew spontaneously in the first lawn. We'll also be starting this project this spring. Beyond just doing the work, we plan to track the amount of time it takes and the cost involved for each step, because we recognize that individuals will want to know more about the upfront costs and when they can have a return on their investment realized in reduced maintenance costs long term. So we understand that it's a big investment, right? Tear up your lawn, kill your lawn movement, right? And how much that costs. And in order to kind of justify it among the different criteria, here's all the environmental criteria, but there's also the time involved and the expense. We're thinking the payoff is probably somewhere around 5 to 6 years for where you actually break even in terms of cost expense. And then after 6 years, 5, 6 years, you're ahead. That's educated guess on our end. We research institution, we want to put the time and effort into actually tracking that so that we have higher levels of confidence that it is going to look like that. So the new trial will also include work to develop the lawn without the removable sod, which we recognize will be one of the largest obstacles for large-scale implementation. So the proposal this year, we're pretty sure that the best method of site preparation is to remove the sod. It accomplishes two things. One is it makes the site more nutrient limited. And as I shared earlier, that's advantageous for the native plants and detrimental to the undesirable species. So we want to tip the scales to the native species, and having less organic, less nutrient soil is one approach to do that. It also reduces some of the seed bank, much of the seed bank, not all of it, but a lot of it, which contains all those turf weeds that we just talked about. So we're pretty sure that that's the preferred approach, but it's also fairly expensive, labor intensive, however you want to do it. So that could be a barrier. So we're going to look at two other alternatives. One is one of the approaches that we did in 2012, which is to put out landscape fabric and solarize the site. The site solarization will reduce some of the seed bank, not eliminate it, not equal to the turf sod removal, but it should bake some of those seed bank seeds, and then there'll be fewer of them germinating. But you still then have the organic layer to contend with, and so We think that that one will be still effective, but less effective is the hypothesis that we're testing. And then the third approach, which I understand some people aren't going to want to do, and I respect those choices of using Roundup to do a chemical burn down of your turf. Aside from the environmental detrimental component of that, we don't think that it will do much about the seed bank, and it leaves all the soil nutrients in place. So we think it'll be the least effective, but it's also the least expensive. So we want to put that in there so people can kind of compare and contrast side by side. So the other thing about the Roundup treatment is most lawns have mature trees, and you don't want them to be negatively impacted, particularly their sensitive root zones. And if you remove the sod on top of them, you have the potential of damaging the roots. That's kind of a unique situation that everybody is going to be dealing with. So what's the most responsible thing to do to get the site ready without damaging your trees? So we think in that situation, the Roundup is probably better. And similarly, the fabric, if we put that on the root zones of our large canopy trees, it's going to cook them and probably be very detrimental to the tree as well. So even though it might not be ideal from an environmental standpoint or from a native lawn outcome standpoint, we're trying to come up with ways to make sure that we don't damage people's highly valued native trees, other ornamental trees and things like that. So that's part of the reason that we're doing this new site preparation study. That side, all the rest of the proposal should be similar. It's all going to be one seeding rate, including some two and a half dozen species that we're going to be putting in here in the next few weeks. All right, and so because it is fairly involved, what we're just talking about, we're working on developing a how-to video that would go along with it, so that could be part of public-facing information, so people could have access to the video to understand the different establishment phases and what's all involved with each. Any and all information that will be generated in our Native Lawn 2.0, we're going to put up on our Native Lawn website page, which you can find at cornellbotanicgardens.org, cornellbotanicgardens.org. So if you want to check in on what we're doing and what the latest news is, that's where you can go to learn more about our native lawn. So while we work to build capacity and the tools to enable you to grow a native lawn, there are some steps you can do today to help address the climate crisis and to give nature a helping hand in your present day backyard. First is to change mowing regimes. So this is kind of where I get up on my little miniature soapbox and preach to the choir here, because you're not going to be able to get a native lawn right away, and there's some things you can do with your current lawn that are more environmentally responsible. So one of the first one is to change the mowing regime, to mow higher and less often. We were doing an analysis here at Cornell University. We're aiming to be carbon neutral here as a goal on our Ithaca campus by 2035. So we're taking inventory of all of our emissions and all of our sectors, and part of that is lawn mowing. We have those evil gas CO2 emitting lawnmowers, just like most other people have. And I was shocked. The average number of times we mow here on campus is 26 times a year. And it is principally to meet an aesthetic that people think is out there. And so this is just in our minds, and we can change what that aesthetic looks like. To mow it higher, to mow it less often, to not worry about some of the weeds that are in it, to kind of accept them, if you will, to convert to an electric mower powered by renewables. Then there's zero emissions. And getting rid of leaf blowers. They're absolutely the worst. They emit so much more CO2 emissions than even the lawnmowers. And they're loud, obnoxious, polluting. They make wonderful electric leaf blowers now. So if you still need to do that, then ditch your gas powered one and get an electric one, battery powered, corded, doesn't matter. Change your mowing regimes. Say no to fertilizers. Most lawns, after the first few years, are completely fine. They can continue to grow and thrive without needing to have fertilizer added to them. That fertilizer just goes right out into the waterways. It's not being absorbed and used by the plants. And if it is, it's actually benefiting some of these weeds that you then are annoyed are in your lawn and then feel the need to spray pesticides on them. So fertilizing actually creates this vicious cycle where then you actually have more weeds that you have to deal with. And then of course Scott's comes in and says, oh, do both pesticide and fertilizer. It's like the absolute worst thing in the world. So say no to chemical companies that are promoting this for lawn health and actually misleading all of you. So, and I said it's more weeds, but it actually makes you mow more often as well because everything's growing more. So it's like, just no to fertilizers. Go organic. Embrace the diversity in your lawn. The extra turf height provides competition for, people don't realize this. When you mow the turf shorter, it actually gives more opportunity for the turf weeds to establish and grow. So the higher you mow, the more shade is produced by your Kentucky bluegrass or whatever it is, the less turf weeds that you end up with. So mow higher, mow less frequently, accept and embrace diversity in your lawn. I'll just talk personally, my own lawn, live out in a rural area, so I don't have to worry about homeowners associations and things like that. And don't have any pesticides. I have white clover, I have common violet, and I have wild strawberry, all interspersed throughout the lawn. And I leave some parts of it high and until like all the clover is done blooming, and then I'll mow that, and I'll have another part that I mow a little bit more. And so it's a polyculture, some native species, some non-native species. But because I'm not using pesticides and I'm mowing higher, it actually allows these things to grow, either like strawberries rhizominously, right, by the runners, or the violets to seed back in. And really the only thing that I do is I go out there and I cut out dandelions every once in a while with one of the little stabby tools. Plantain is, it's part of the lawn. I accept it, it's fine. Black medic and so on. So you can change your own paradigm and tolerate some of these things and just change that way while you're waiting for us to get the seed out for the native lawn. All right, and obviously if you do that, you become a lot more pollinator friendly for your traditional lawn. And then as I imagine many of you intentionally are shrinking your lawns by establishing pollinator beds, rain gardens, other native landscapings, and bit by bit shrinking the high maintenance turf and creating habitat and beauty and diversity in your lives. So I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir on that one, but that's a piece of it too if you're still dealing with your turf lawn. All right, so I'll get off my little soapbox about our traditional turfgrass lawn and just say that we all have agency here in trying to address this significant biodiversity crisis that we're finding ourselves in, and the climate crisis here. And at times it can feel overwhelming, right? There's so much that needs to be done, and how can we actually move the needle? Well, collectively we can, and we all have agency, environmental agency, to start this way in our backyard. So we can do that through mowing, reducing the fertilizers, stopping pesticide use, looking for these turf alternatives, native landscaping, and actually put hope and an agency out there for doing everything we can on our own in our own backyards. So whether you decide to take a small step or a big native lawn leap, we're optimistic that collectively we can shape and drive a new environmentally responsible lawn paradigm. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm happy to take questions.
Todd, great presentation. That was packed with information. We got quite a few questions. Try to group some of them together. You talked a bit about the preparation, whether you could remove sod or solarize, glyphosate if people are up for that. Some people also mentioned like, how do you feel about cardboarding or using wood chips, those different kind of things.
Cardboard, I think, would work. It would smother things. So it would kill the vegetation. It wouldn't affect the seed bank. So it might be a step below solarization. And wood chips, I wouldn't advise because you're putting more nutrients into the system. And the idea with the native lawn is that you're trying to tip the balance here in creating nutrient limited conditions. And that was one of the reasons we're worried about legumes getting established in, the white clover that I mentioned before. We don't really want to have a lot of extra nutrients. So clover is a nitrogen fixer, right? It's putting nitrogen into the soil, and then that can benefit other species that are growing there. So the idea here is try to make the site as nutrient limited as possible. So wood chips would kind of be counterproductive to that.
Wood chips
But
probably wouldn't work if you're sowing seed either.
say that again, Mike?
Chips probably wouldn't work well if you're sowing seed.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Cool. There was also a question, like we noticed the sand and the stone dust you're sort of like raising the pH. Down here we have a large pineland zone with the sandy acidic soil. I assume you're probably going to need a whole different range of plants if you're going to work with that.
No, I actually wanted to mention this. I think you guys are ideal conditions for that. Probably don't even need to amend your soils there. So right now for our Native Lawn 2.0, we did some soil samples already to kind of understand what it was that we had. So just to give context, the original Native Lawn, that's right here by my office, was in an area that was converted to agriculture and is in the floodplain of the largest tributary to Cuba Lake. And so it's got a little bit more clay and silt content in it as a soil type. Because it was heavy and not as well drained, that's part of the reason that we wanted it to be amended. Not necessarily for the pH component, it was more for the drainage and to make it droughtier. Again, kind of everything everything a traditional lawn wants, you want to do the opposite of.
Yeah.
Don't water it, right? And don't fertilize it. Don't give it extra nutrients. So the Native Lawn 2.0 site that we have is a different location here in the Wildflower Garden. It has sandy loam soils, and we're not planning to amend it either. And our pH is, 7.8 to 7.2 or something like that, which we're totally fine with. But for the Pinelands region, lots of sections of New Jersey, I think is going to be ideal conditions for the native lawn. Now, understand most subdivisions, people came in and put all kinds of different things in there for the soil that, established.
Oh yeah, it was a development. Yeah, they would have amended.
So you have to kind of, keep track of that. And I advise people to do soil samples, before they embark on a native lawn, just to be sure that they know what they have.
And so somebody mentioned that like if you don't mow, a lot of multiflora rose and barberry and things come up. But you mentioned that. I mean, that's why you do mow twice a year. And you mentioned some things you have to go and manually get them.
Right. Yeah. And the woody plants are the principal ones. So I remember the first year that we had quite a few cottonwood seedlings that established in our lawn, and things hadn't really grown in all that much just yet. So that was a bit of work to go in there and hand weed all those out, because we knew at once a year, twice a year mowing regime, it wouldn't get rid of them. It would only make them little dwarf cottonwoods. So, and yeah, I wouldn't want barberry in my native lawn, any of those other woody invasive shrubs. So some of those are going to require a bit of work. But I tell you, I really like there's two tools that we use, different scales, kind of the same thing. One is this little kind of V-shaped, upside down V-shaped sticker on the end of a pole. And it's great for tap-rooted things, and I just go in there and pop the tap roots out of the dandelions and other things like that. And then there's another one very similar to this that's called the parsnip predator. And it's basically a spade shovel with a short handle on it, and the tip of the shovel is cut off so that it's concave instead of pointed. And you do the same thing. You stick it underneath the root of a tap-rooted species like a poison parsnip, and it's done for. So it's good for woody plants as well, just severing that woody root. So,
and of course that, if you're doing your 1/4 acre yard, it's easy to take care of these things by hand. If you were doing 10 acres of them, it's different. But yeah. Somebody asked, do you need to aerate the lawn, right? That's something you do for turf grass, right? The whole point here is to not aerate the lawn or do things like that.
Yeah, that would be pretty detrimental. Whenever you kind of disturb the soil, and you could reemerge non-native species from the seed bank that you don't want. So you would want to maintain it intact as much as you can.
Yeah, somebody asked about, the how many leaves did you have? And you mentioned the duff layer, that you want to leave those leaves and
Yep, and that's fine. We've done a couple different things on mowing. We started off and we were still using a push mower, gas-powered push mower early on, but we realized that we couldn't mow it as high as we wanted. Commercially, they don't make them that available that way. I think it's a safety thing. They don't want people's feet getting under them and all those kinds of things. But we recently came across a product that Steel, the chainsaw brand Steel makes. It's an electric hedge trimmer, and they have an attachment where it can go on a extended pole. Well, it's meant to go up high to like trim hedges nice and fun. Well, we're using it to mow the lawn and clip it.
so it's electric scythe.
Yeah, electric scythe. You could use a string trimmer, but it's kind of messy, and it actually rips it rips the stems and leaves and macerates them.
Yeah, it really,
Whereas a nice clean clip of the electric trimmer, as you say, electric scythe. So that's the new tool of choice for us to mow with. And the nice thing about it is you can actually be variable in the height that you want to use it for. And if there's a multiflora rose there, you can put it right down on the ground and scalp it.
so some people have asked, like, if they don't want to go, the complete whole hog with removing sod and solarizing and all this, like, can you maybe just sow these seeds in your existing lawn and letting them fill in? And you mentioned that the Kentucky bluegrass was, would get crowded out by some of the natives. Is that an alternative to just
Yeah,
sow some good stuff? And
that's a really great question. So I've done a lot of different habitat restorations in different situations, and there's a term of founder effect, like who gets there first wins, if you will. because really at the end of the day, it's all about plant competition. And if you think about it, it's so much easier to get established if you're there first than if you're there trying to squeeze into something that is already highly competitive. Because it's all about plant competition for light, water, resources, nutrients, and so on. So, yes, you probably could get some things that could grow and find their ways into the holes and to kind of establish that way, but it's going to be probably very limited because there's so much Kentucky bluegrass that is already there. Kind of,
Probably be better with plugs
yeah,
than
yeah. So giving, yeah, that would give something a better advantage if you plugged, if you will, to get things established. But my suggestion would be do it for 10 square feet. Rather than try to do it a little bit across a big area, just do it in phases, and whatever you have your capacity to
good,
do would probably be more effective overall.
good. Yeah, good point. Good
And,
point.
and, and I'll say, that there's a flip side to this as well, which is once you get the native plant, the native lawn established, it can be highly resilient to new things coming in that are undesirable. In the exact opposite of what we were just talking about. Because that's what you want to get to is that maintenance mode. And then it's much less likely that you'll get those other things be able to get established because they have to come in ostensibly from seed. Now, like Canadian thistle, we were worried about because it can grow rhizominously, and therefore it could just creep on its way into the native lawn. So we really had to get rid of that one. But once you get this area with this really tight matrix, it's more impervious to new things getting established at that point.
Okay, cool. Couple of people asked about deer. I mean, deer are probably not as big a problem with these type of plants.
Deer don't like grass, so that's a good thing. It's an issue everywhere, and some of the forbs that we have in the mix are going to be more desirable to be eaten than others. But here's the thing: we're already mowing them kind of low, so they're not sticking up where deer are able to see them as easily. Yeah, and so we really haven't had a lot of deer browse impact because they're going after other things that are more evident.
Yeah, they're not really ground grazers, right? They want it at that height. That's cool. Let's see here. Um, so a couple of people asked, and I think you addressed this at with Margaret Roach. People asked about like, if you have if you have these grasses, are you going to attract ticks? You know, and I think you said there were some studies like no.
Yeah, so it's a great question because I know it's a huge issue, right? It's a human health issue, it's a pet health issue. The list goes on. So our expectation and some early research has kind of proved this out, which is the traditional turf lawns have almost no tick predators in them. And so the tick populations can just grow as much as the deer and the small rodent populations allow for the ticks to complete their life cycle. So the idea with the native lawn is that it has other tick predators in it that can help to better control the tick population than nothing in the turf lawn. And some of our early research on insect families, is part of that, right? That level of diversity that's there is so much higher than in the turf lawn. And
Yeah,
then
you mentioned four times higher, right?
yeah, and even other things like, that it's better wildlife habitat. Possums and birds are two of the big, tick predators. So you want to attract more of them, and you're going to get more of those things in the native lawn than you're going to get in turf.
I think. A couple of people said they had a lot of moss in their lawn. Like, should they remove it? I mean, I would think if you had moss, you should be happy.
I love moss lawns. I encourage you to keep it. So I don't think that the Danthonian, the native lawn, would do well in the kinds of conditions where you have moss lawns, because what that's telling you is that it's really shaded, it's really moist, and it's perfect for that. So promote that, right? Keep that moss plant community there. Keep it nice and shaded. Don't let it get covered by leaves, and it's a lovely aesthetic
Yeah,
alternative.
moss is native, and if it's there, that means it's the habitat for it.
Yep, exactly. And
Um,
usually it's multiple species as well. It's not just one, so it's great.
and yeah, so we just, mentioned shadier conditions. Shadier conditions, maybe you go with moss. Um, so I think, somebody mentioned like if you're going to remove the sod, like what do you do with the sod? Do you compost? How do you reuse
Compost.
it more?
Get it into your compost and cook it, and then put it in your garden.
Okay.
I know that could be very prohibitive. That's why we're looking at some of these other alternatives, right? If it's 100 square feet, yeah, you can compost it, right? If you really want to do your entire backside front yards, you're going to have to figure out a different way. And I know that there's a lot of landscaping companies that you'd probably need to work with that would then have places that they could dispose of it and repurpose it.
Um, so one of the questions from someone that appears to be a landscaper and says he's dealing with HOAs and commercial properties and trying to convince them of, the benefits that there's a cost savings to doing this. Do you have any information, any studies on how much you really save? I mean, you talked about the savings in gasoline and
Yeah.
all these other things.
So that's part of our project right now in terms of understanding the upfront costs of establishing the three different site preparation treatments and the actual installation. We're working with a local landscape company to get some of the other costs, and then with Cornell folks that do our lawn here at our grounds department as well, to get that kind of full cost, because like it's not an accurate cost if I just get it from Cornell grounds department, because they're not doing chemlawn kinds of treatments to their turf lawn. So you kind of gotta go to the extreme and come up with those kinds of costs. But that's what we're planning to do, so that we can kind of present that full case, the economic case, the environmental case. And but what's interesting is some of these homeowners associations and all the covenants that they have that would preclude what it is that we're talking about. And I was actually absolutely floored when I was looking at the comments after the New York Times article. There was like three top categories of the types of questions that were there. One was not a question, it was we love you guys, keep doing great work, which was really heartwarming to see. The second most was, I would love to do this, but I can't because of my homeowners association. Hundreds of
Yeah.
comments about that, and I was absolutely shocked. And I'm aware a couple of years ago there was a lawsuit in Maryland against the homeowners association that actually ended up in state law being changed, and now there's a movement to try to enshrine the ability of homeowners to be able to manage their own landscapes
Yeah.
for gardening, for native plants, for all these positive land uses, and override these HOA restrictions. So I'm hoping that movement continues, so that people aren't handcuffed and can, I think it's a great thing to put in your front yard. Most people don't use their front yards at all, right? It's just there. And but you can't in a homeowners association have anything taller than this. So anyway, I hope we can provide more very specific information so that landscaping companies, others that are dealing with their homeowners association, have resources to convince them to make those kinds of changes.
Cool. That'd be great, because that, like you say, that's the big issue. I'm lucky I don't have a homeowners association. My whole property is a homegrown national park, but not everybody can do it. So this, I think we've answered like all the pertinent questions. This has been really great, and I want to thank you very much. And you gave your email out at the end, so if people have questions, they can email you.
Yep.
Okay. Well, everybody, we're going to wrap it up. Again, thank you so much, Todd. Great presentation.
My pleasure, and good luck to everybody with all your native plant loving adventures.
Okay, take care. Bye.